he turns back to me and he goes, "Is this a girl?" And then he starts fucking French kissing the counter. I mean, like his tongue all over it. That was clearly time for me to take my leave. I don't know. I suspect this is a problem with some personalities who go into finance.
Zero fucks
Given podcast.
Today we'll be covering our 4th of July recap and the headlines helping us solve the great US versus UK debate, Blackstone's foray into SRTs, the British investment banker caught having a Treesome, and US prosecutors cracking down on commercial mortgage fraud. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.
So I'm heading off to London soon. And in honor of my upcoming travels and the recent 4th of July festivities, I wanted to settle the UK versus the US debate once and for all.
I wasn't aware there was a debate, but...
Yeah, well, we don't invite you because you don't let me get a word in edgeways. But I must admit, before we get into this, I long ago accepted that Mark Zuckerberg was better than me at business, better than me at coding, always going to be financially more successful than me. And it's not just because I'm a short seller. If I'd have gone into tech, I would have sucked compared to him. But I had a pretty brutal realization this week around the 4th of July. And the realization was that Mark Zuckerberg is actually cooler than me. That was the one place where I thought I could at least tie with him not being that cool. This really stemmed because he put out what people are universally deriding as a very uncool photo of him wake surfing. I was like, this guy is really fucking uncool. The problem is, there is also either a picture or a video of me that exists wake surfing this week. So I was out at a friend's lake on Lake Austin. And I don't claim to be like a wonderful wake surfer or anything. I can like just about get up and kind of let go of the rope, but not quite. And so, a friend was on the back of the boat, took a video of me. And I was thinking, like, I bet I look pretty cool. Saw the video. I look like a fucking loser. And I especially look like a loser compared to Mark Zuckerberg. So,
Well, two things. Number one, he probably paid $100,000 for lessons. Number two, I think it'd be funny as shit as, you know, like, when he wiped out and he dumped the American flag into the water, if some people around him like beat the shit out of him for disrespecting the flag.
Do you think he has to pay $100,000 for that as well?
No, I think they just, want to kick the fucking shit out of him.
That's fair. But I do want to get back to the meat of the argument, the US versus UK. So you guys had presidential debates the other week. I was actually watching it with my wife, my mother-in-law, and my daughter. Now, my daughter's able to get a UK passport pretty easily. My mother-in-law and wife, not so much. I spent a lot of the debate just, saying to my daughter, like, don't worry, we can escape, we can get the fuck out of here. And what really occurred to me was not how weak Biden looked and frail, or just how much Trump lies. And this is especially apparent around 4th of July. It's like, guys, you could have had someone who is healthy, who is somewhat cogent, who is on the forefront of environmental law, who has been divorced, but didn't make it scandalous with a porn star. And he's a sprightly 75 years of age. You could have had King Charles. You guys really fucked this up. What have you really won? I look at, among other things, these very high capital gains tax rates you pay. UK, much lower. What have you guys really achieved?
What do you think? You think Biden's out as the nominee?
I mean, he says no, but...
Well, when you have to say no, you have a problem, and it's not a small one. Look, I think he's out. I think he's done. And it's ridiculous right now seeing what's going on where they're trying to control Democratic Congress people and keep them from saying, oh, we need a new candidate, because at this point, it's the voters. Like, you can't control the voters, and the polls are showing that the independents are breaking hard away from him post-debate. So I think he's done. And I think, like, if the Democrats did this the right way, it would be huge for them. And the right way would be It's an open convention.
Down.
You get like the 5 or 6 people who, could conceivably be candidates in the general, to go on stage each night of the convention, make speeches, this is why Trump is awful and this is why I'm the best person. And they do instant polling, especially in swing states, using that sentiment to guide the decision. Then they pick the new nominee. And the reason why this is such a great opportunity is like, this would be the highest stakes reality TV show in the history of reality TV shows. And I think this is something that our competition, Bill Maher, talks about a lot, right? It's how Americans just want to be entertained when it comes to politics. So what could be more entertaining than that? So yeah, that's the opportunity. So I think Biden's done regardless. That's the opportunity. I'm sure they'll fuck it up and just anoint Kamala Harris, and and I think she'd go down in flames too. But anyway, that's my 10 seconds of Bill Ackman here.
I do wonder if the likes of Newsom are kind of hanging back because they don't want to just be shunted on. Like, they're going to think, hey, I get one go at this. I might as well do it in 4 years' time. That's my only consideration with some of the real candidates.
That's part of it, but the thing is, most of them have been out there campaigning for Biden since the debate. Newsom has, Gretchen Whitmer. I mean, don't kid yourself. They're really campaigning for themselves to be the replacement nominee, while they're going out there and saying, oh, Joe Biden is the man, da-da-da. I mean, they don't believe that, I'm sure. But the thing is, there is, of course, this culture of fear within the party. And it's kind of funny seeing how a lot of the donors are afraid, if we don't give money, more money to the Biden campaign and the super PACs, what? They're not going to take your money the next cycle? So that part, that's the part that's kind of disheartening. And, there's one thing that I can consistently say about the Democratic Party is that, well, I guess both parties, just filled with a bunch of spineless pussies, frankly.
Yeah, well, that's what happens when you let people choose their leaders. Again, we have this wonderful system in the UK where it's
But what does he lead? What does he lead? I love how the sovereign is technically the head of England's or the UK's military. If this guy decided to declare war on Russia, I mean, would a single airplane take off in that direction? Would a single ship, set sail? I really hope not.
You're asking the wrong question. You obviously haven't seen the Horseman's Guard. You got to be thinking, would the Russians be scared if they saw these dudes with very big furry hats and immaculate red uniforms riding towards them? Would they stand and fight? No. I think they'd fuck off because they'd be like, wow, look at those lovely red uniforms. They blend in so well amongst the urban environment we're in. That's what you got to be thinking.
Yeah, well, and I have seen them. I've gone to Buckingham Palace, and I just kind of felt like those guys were like souvenirs. I don't get the uniforms.
We need to talk about the Nathan's hot dog eating contest cheating allegations. This year's 4th place winner, well, I'm not sure really if you're a winner if you come 4th place in a hot dog eating competition, but the guy's name is Nick Wery, is under hot water for stealing plates of consumed hot dogs from another competitor's stack and adding them to his own place setting. This move allegedly inflated his score from 46.75 hot dogs to over 50 hot dogs.
When I read the story about how somebody cheated their way initially to first place at the Nathan's hot dog contest, I just felt like this is the turning point. The U.S. has reached its high water mark, and we are definitely an empire in decline. I mean, is nothing sacred? You cheat in the fucking hot dog eating contest on 4th of July? It's just such an affront. Morally, just repugnant, disgusting. But yeah, apparently what this guy did was they counted him eating 40 whatever hot dogs, 0.75. But they double check by counting the number of plates because each plate has 5 hot dogs on it. So I guess he slipped a plate from one of the other competitors, put it in his stack, and after they concluded the contest and said that, this guy is in 4th place, he's like, no, I demand a recount. So they did a recount. They're like, oh, well, based on plates, he actually had over 50, and he's the winner. But the thing that's actually crazy is, so I went to this guy's website, and He's a professional eater. He's got all of these contest results in there, like 15 pounds of shortcake in 10 minutes. And so this dude regularly does 45, 50 hot dogs in 10 minutes. And you'd think that he'd be a slob. I mean, this is one of the most ripped human beings in America. Like, this dude is shredded. And I'm like, what the fuck am I doing wrong? Like, how do you do this? So yeah, it's one of the great paradoxes of life, and I don't know, maybe something like that makes America great.
Next time we go to Capitol Grill, instead of your order, which is I want the salad, extra filet,
Steak salad.
no balsamic, no cheese,
No.
just only the skinny lettuce, take all the other stuff off. Are you gonna be like, yeah, wait, I'd like 46 and a half hot dogs, please, and just something to dip him, just some water to dip him in, so I can chow him down.
10 fillets, 10 glasses of wine, and then will I be shredded?
What were the other food things he's done? The other food competitions? I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, I like the pie eating one.
And his wife too is a
His
professional.
wife does it.
She actually did 50 hot dogs at the women's side of the Nathan's hot dog.
She's the real winner.
What's the plumbing like at their house? Like, what kind of shits do these people have to take? I mean, I hope they're not on septic, because you'd have to get the truck there like every other month.
Imagine when you like introduce your wife. Oh, and what is it you love about her? Oh, she can get 50 wieners down.
It's like in Clerks. 36?
So I did watch this live. I'm not gonna lie. That came on and the kids wanted to watch it. And I said to actually the guy standing next to me, I'm like, this is peak Americana. And he's like, nah, this is peak Coney Island. So I like the fact that even Americans shun these professional eating competitions.
Well, I mean, if you knew it'd make you, like, you know, have the body of a Greek god, maybe you wouldn't be so quick to turn your nose up at it.
British investment banker was arrested after stripping off, stuffing mud in his boxers, and romping with a tree.
What does it mean to romp with a tree? Like, let's be...
I was hoping Freddy could tell me that. Freddy?
Romping is one of the many words we have for fucking.
How does one romp with a tree exactly?
I think there's two things that are important here. Firstly, it's extremely clear to me why he did this. And it has nothing to do with a perversion for trees. It's entirely to announce himself as an ESG investor, okay? Like, that's beyond doubt for me.
I suspect this is a problem with some personalities who go into finance. They just, you know, I don't know if it's they get drunk enough or things are stressful enough, but they basically just try to kick it to whatever it is that's around them. A tree, pastrami sandwich, bathroom counter. It's maybe an interview question we need to ask when, you know, when we're hiring again.
Yeah, I hear stories like this, and I find it really odd that people think short sellers are strange.
The guy who porked the tree was obviously like, you know, he's in VC, right? You can't be more long-oriented than that. Maybe it did have something to do with ESG investing, right? Where it's like he got fucked on like an ESG investment, so he decided that he was going to get his revenge and fuck back.
Look, my real hope is it was at least a tree that was like somewhat smooth, like a beech tree. I mean, if you went at it with an oak tree...
Well, I mean, maybe there was a little squirrel inside, and that was the whole point, and everybody missed it. Just left an extra nut for the squirrels. So the Supreme Court has been busy of late. In Loper Bright, the Supreme Court just overturned the doctrine of Chevron Deference, which has to do with administrative agencies, and the idea that courts would defer to their interpretation of the laws that they enforce. So this has huge impact, or will eventually have huge impact across the economy, including with the SEC. And then there was a decision about a week or two before that was directly involving the SEC in Jarkizi. And in Jarkizi, the court held that the SEC's use of its own administrative court systems in cases where they were seeking monetary penalties is impermissible and is unconstitutional because it violates the Seventh Amendment right to jury trial. So it's really interesting. And in the Jarkizi case also, one of the things that had come out had been introduced to evidence, and that one came out of, both of these came out of the Fifth Circuit, which includes Texas, and so the Fifth Circuit's very much, conservative Federalist Society judges who, really, I think, have hated the expansion of administrative power. But with Jarkizi, one of the things that had been introduced to evidence was that, according to an academic study, the SEC won 90% of its cases in its own courts versus only 69% in federal courts. So that's something that Justice Gorsuch found important in his concurrence. So one thing that somebody pointed out that I think is salient is that this isn't like this immediate huge win on the conservative side, because there's going to have to be a lot of litigation to overturn prior rules like EPA rules, maybe SEC rules, etc. So you don't immediately get this sea change. And in fact, maybe what you get initially is a dialing back of investment because of the uncertainty associated with which rules will be upheld and which ones will be struck down by the courts. But it does have me seriously thinking about the SEC's rules regarding registration under the Investment Advisor Act 1940. And so we are, Muddy Waters is a fully registered investment advisor, and that's because until 2011, the way that the SEC had an exemption. So if you were managing money for fewer than 15 private funds, and a hedge fund is a private fund, then you didn't have to register. But in 2011, after Dodd-Frank, they changed it and they said, or 150 million in total assets under management. And so that's what snares firms such as ours. And so I do wonder whether there would be a way to challenge that, because it certainly does drive up the costs of being, doing what we do. You look around at how these pod shops have proliferated, and a lot of it's because these managers who go to work at pod shops, it's just not that economic to run their strategies on a standalone basis. In large part is because of the regulatory cost burden. So I'm kind of excited about this, and I am mulling whether we should be the ones, especially because we sit in the Fifth Circuit, to challenge this, or at least to challenge, say, the books and records requirement, which is, a very expensive thing as well when you end up getting sued a lot. So I find this very interesting and a little bit exciting.
On the corporate side, tobacco, oil kind of spring to mind. Do you think we'll see a lot of challenges to existing regulation from those kind of groups? And one that kind of stands out that people have discussed is, I think, menthol was outlawed. That's kind of one that's a bit of a standout. And then obviously the EPA, there's a lot of carbon polluting guys who are going to look to unpick regulation that's not business friendly. Anything else that's kind of out of left field you can think of?
Well, I mean, look, I think pretty much any and every rule in some respect that's a restriction on somebody. When you think about it, there's a motive to challenge it. But when looking at whether we may challenge, say, the SEC rules about the Investment Advisor Act or books and records requirement, et cetera, there's a doctrine called ripeness. So you're not allowed to bring a suit unless there's an actual controversy, that the courts can adjudicate. So if someone were the subject of an enforcement action at present, then they would have a right. Then their challenge to the SEC rules would be ripe. So I don't know. I pinged a law firm a few days ago that's done a decent amount of constitutional litigation, especially in this area involving the Administrative Procedures Act, APA. And, their response when I asked, well, we're not subject to an enforcement proceeding. Is it do we have the ability? Is it ripe for us to challenge this? And if so, do we have a statute of limitation problems, right? Because that's the other thing. That interpretation was changed in 2011. We've been managing private funds since 2015. So is that an issue? And look, the answer was, if you pay us $30,000 to $40,000, we'll tell you. So, I haven't yet agreed to pay for the memorandum that's probably going to say maybe. So to your question, the easiest way to have these challenges is when somebody is subject to an enforcement proceeding under those rules. Absent that, it's not clear to me how quickly or easily they could be challenged.
Blackstone Group, which manages more than $1 trillion in assets, has become one of the biggest investors in SRTs backed by short-term loans used by private equity funds to close deals in advance of receiving cash from their backer.
And Krista, for the uninitiated, such as myself, what are SRTs?
No. Significant risk transactions.
No, they're shitty risk transfers.
Transfers.
Shitty risk transfers.
The FT wrote a piece on this part of the market which is not really that well understood by people outside of kind of niche high finance. And essentially what it is similar-ish to the way like CDOs, CLOs, all that stuff works. It's taking parts of risk. Sometimes it's auto loans. Can be stakes in private equity firms, it can be commercial loans, and it's kind of packaging it up either off banks' balance sheets or direct from the person who's doing the lender into effectively like a product or a bond. And one thing that is being packaged up is a part of private equity where instead of managers calling capital immediately, sometimes they fund part of the equity commitment with a loan. And the reason you would do this is that if you call the capital at a later date, like the equity commitment from your LPs, it juices your IRR. So it's a way of effectively providing a better return on cash, really, but it's kind of an accounting gimmick. It's total bullshit. And it turns out that Blackstone, because they're a very large investment group, and they're basically invested in pretty much every product you can ever imagine, actually are invested in some of their own funds' sort of capital commitment lines. And there's nothing per se wrong with that other than just it being incredible amount of circularity. Without being an expert on this, I don't have anything super smart to say about this being like, it's just like CDOs or CDO squareds and it's going to bring down the entire, the entire financial system or anything. It does touch upon, though, how these really large groups have actually become these massive decentralized pots of risk. And so what we've done is we've taken a lot of risk that used to sit in banks, which was probably more levered in banks, to be fair, from the standpoint of banks having like just a leveraged structure to begin with, and it's moved them into parts of the financial system that are really not as heavily regulated. And while on one hand you could say that's actually not a bad thing, because if you take, for example, private credit, that's considerably less levered than any bank lending is. The flip side is you just can't really get a great picture of what's going on in that part of the system because there's not a centralized reporting the way there is with banks. So it's a dark market. I don't think there's many people with a complete picture of it. And anytime we see some new exotic product that's meant to be very low risk and has been back tested through a very benign credit environment, and the people selling it to you say, this is a great product because over the last 18 years there hasn't been a single default, you kind of grimace a little bit inside. So I thought it was a really excellent piece by the FT.
Well, I mean, the thing with not as levered, when you're looking at, say, Lehman Brothers pre-crisis, its assets exceeded its shareholders' equity, 40-to-1 ratio, apparently. Some of these other, Bear was somewhere in that range. That it's not necessarily just the leverage. You're not worried. Look, Blackstone is not going to be brought down by one of these funds or some of these funds failing. But the question is, if the investors in those funds could get wiped, because the leverage within those funds could be a lot more than what Blackstone, if you took all the leverage in all of its funds versus all the equity. But maybe the bigger problem is that the economy now is so dependent on credit, or significant swaths of the economy are so dependent on that type of credit, that once you do start to see losses in the private credit space, well, what steps in to replace it? Like, you could have funding freezes there, and that would have knock-on effects. It's not like a commercial bank where depositors are going to get wiped out and, mom and pa's retirement is gone. But I don't know that it's really that salient to discuss the overall leverage ratios there of, these financial institutions versus banks pre-crisis. You still have, there's still this potential. This is, I think, hotter money, in credit than what you normally get with banks. So if there are losses and the money retreats, it's going to take a while for banks to step in, but they're really the only ones, because they have this, semi-permanent capital in the form of deposits, who are able to make these loans even when liquidity recedes in the rest of the financial markets. So yeah, what do you
Can you hear me?
What do you have to say about that, Krista?
I don't have to. I think this is great. I think we should
Buy stocks.
Just keep going.
That's what you should say.
Exactly.
Buy
Buy
stocks.
stock.
US prosecutors are cracking down on commercial mortgage fraud, rattling the $4.7 trillion industry and raising concerns over loan accuracy. More of these schemes have been recently exposed, the result of the decline in commercial real estate values due to higher interest rates and increased defaults. One thing I want to talk about here, I no longer, even shudder reading trillion. That used to be a really big number, like a really, really big number. I remember when TARP was 800 billion, and that seemed like, whoa, that's a big number. And now there's loads of stocks that are like, a couple trillion in market cap. So, I just no longer feel like that's a big number. That's just kind of regular, run-of-the-mill, we have a problem kind of number these days.
Yeah, no, it's funny you bring up TARP. Like, that was, at that time, huge number. I keep reading these articles, or periodically read these articles about how much the federal government is defrauded for. I remember with like Paycheck Protection Program and the other COVID, other big COVID stimulus. I think the government's own number is that the total fraud is like 400 or 500 billion, which isn't that far south of TARP. Then the Wall Street Journal had a really interesting article recently about how in Medicare Advantage, which is run through private insurers, a lot of these private insurers are tacking on diagnoses, right? So under Medicare Advantage, they're allowed to tack on diagnoses that didn't come from the doctors. And they've been billing Medicare for these diagnoses even when there was no treatment received. And I think it's a big number. I want to say it sounded like it was about 50 billion that the Wall Street Journal found in reimbursements to private insurers for treatments that were never received, or for treatments that were never provided. And I think they said United Healthcare had about 6 or 7 billion in 2021 alone. And it's like pre-tax profits were like, 14 billion. So yeah, a trillion, what's that? We're leaking so much money all the time. Like, who fucking cares? I also heard, I think, remember with Sam Bankman-Fried, they were talking about like whether he would be the world's first trillionaire. I heard there's this guy in Indonesia who's actually already a trillionaire. Some former commodities trader.
Really?
Yeah.
That's the rumor.
I can't remember the guy's name.
Jeez.
Hollins, I think. Ian Hollins. Ever heard of him?
Can neither confirm nor deny. Going back to commercial real estate, the one thing that I am curious about, there's a lot of like doom porn out there. There's a guy called, I think, Triple Net Investor on Twitter, and really interesting stuff. He's always tweeting out, hey, this was bought for $600 million in 2018, and it's just sold for 120 million. And there's hundreds of these examples. Like, first it was kind of like, all right, it's a few in downtown LA and a bit of San Francisco and some shithole part of the country that I've never visited. But now it's everywhere. It's New York. It's places I like. And I guess I'm wondering just who is taking the losses? Like literally, where are the losses going? Because you've heard of a few property funds gating, and obviously, there's been the stuff with BREIT, but I don't really feel like anywhere I've seen, the Blackstone whatever fund is down 43%, or this commercial bank has blown up. And I don't know if it's just we're not paying attention to it, or we're not in the flow of that. Obviously, people aren't advertising that they were the equity check in these things, but it just feels like the losses are in this big black hole that no one seems to have owned up to.
But a lot of these loans are picking, right? So it's I was actually I tweeted out something on just kind of taking the piss out of private credit the other day. There was a Bloomberg headline about policymakers are concerned because 40% of private credit sponsors don't have skin in the game, and they're the incentives might not be aligned. So like I tweeted something out, kind of like saying but and then regular viewer, initials CT, hit me up with a blog post that recently been done on private credit by a very large financial institution that I'm sure has got a few private credit funds, and they're pointing out that the default rates in private credit are no higher than they are in traditional bank lending at some other historic point in the cycle. But the whole question was like, well, yeah, but if you consider these loans that are picking, which I think is not a feature of bank lending, right? But again, when you have this private credit market, I think you have all these bilateral arrangements where the sponsors are allowing these loans to pick. If you included that, and if you knew what that percentage was, I think the default rates would look materially higher than they are. So it's just like the ultimate extend and pretend game here, or it's kind of like Japan, I think, in terms of where these losses are. I think they're just not being realized yet because a lot of the loans are picking. Well,
hopefully we fully get to Japan, and we're only months away from panty vending machines on every corner.
Yeah, look, we have much to learn from Japan in some respects.
Thanks for joining us. Please like and subscribe.
Zero fucks given podcast.